Hello, everybody. This is Professor P again. I want to talk to you today about some of the content that's included in the topic on IT professionals. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective from the career side and a little bit of my experience as an IT professional, as a manager of IT professionals, and as a director of information systems. The module covers a number of issues with regard to the job of being a PC technician. Whether or not you have the exact job title, it's important for you to understand the role of a PC technician, the versatility that's necessary, and the level of patience that you need to have to do the job. There are a lot of different roles on the help desk side of technology support. It depends on what types of things that you're supporting on the IT side, whether it's a particular vertical market software application for a very particular business like an insurance company or a technical engineering company or any company that requires pretty specialized software. That's one side of it. The other side of it could be you just supporting generic software like Microsoft Office, applications on phones that the users of the company use, generic applications for things like accounting, expense reports, types of things that people use in the day-to-day operations of a business. The thing that I want to point out to you is whether or not you have the job title of help desk specialist or an IT support person, or even if you're a programmer in a programming group or a security specialist for cybersecurity responses, the role of a PC technician will never leave you. You're going to use these skills for yourself. You're going to use these skills to help others. You're going to really have a basket of skills that's going to be valuable to you. You need to understand that there's going to be a lot of different situations that you're going to run into when you're doing customer support. You're going to be placed into some very difficult positions, but the job that you end up with will be rewarding because you're helping people. And when you solve problems for people or fix issues and they can go back to work, you're going to be appreciated. So this is really good for information for you both as an IT professional and however you elevate yourself in the company, whatever positions you hold in the future. We're talking about things relating to IT, but you can apply a lot of these situations to any kind of customer service position. What we're talking about here is designed to make you a better person, especially when you're dealing with customers who are using information technology. I'm not necessarily going to cover in detail what's covered in the labs for this module or specifically what's covered in the textbook if you have one. I am talking generically here. It's very important for you to look at the materials that is included in your class, module by module. When you're covering a particular module, it's pretty important that you go ahead and complete whatever reading assignments you have up front. Take a review or look at the PowerPoints that are available to you for those modules. If you don't understand anything in the PowerPoints that you're reviewing, you can always go back and refer to the detailed information either in your text or in the lab system that you're using. Always recommend that you complete the reading assignments first and review the PowerPoints before you start working in the lab system or doing any other assignments that you might be assigned for a module. Whether they're in your learning management system, whether they're out of the textbook, doing the reading and getting a foundation of knowledge for that first part is very important to help you along for your assignments. I'm adding color to the IT profession. And I want you to understand that as a PC technician, you're going to be dealing with all types of people. And what I mean by all types of people is people that may be salespeople, clerks in front of a point of sale system. They could be people out in the field working out of trucks, servicing homes. They could be people that are serving food in a restaurant. People that use IT could have all kinds of different responsibilities. Not only do they have different responsibilities, but they may have different job titles. They may have different levels in the company. You may be dealing with somebody that's at some of the lower levels of the company, working in the mailroom, different jobs that are more entry-level jobs, all the way up to the president, chief executive officer, chief information officer. In a help desk environment, in a support environment, you really don't know who's going to be on the other end of that phone or on the other end of that email. So it's important for you to understand that you could be talking to somebody very, very important. Not that all employees aren't important. Of course they are. But you may end up in a situation where you're talking to a very frustrated president of the company who needs help right away, and you need to put that into perspective. Okay? The topic of professionalism and how to support customers well and how to show professionalism is critical to developing a good relationship with users, with your customers. You have to show that you appreciate their concerns, that their concerns are important, that their issues are important. They're not petty issues, they're not minor issues. You treat every issue as something important and valuable. You show them that you understand what the issue is, you demonstrate good listening skills, and you respond appropriately. There's specific steps that you'll be taught in the lab system that talk about the steps that you take on any particular support interaction. There's some important things that I'll mention now that always need to be included in it. Number one is you always make eye contact. Number two, you listen carefully. Number three, you document what the customer, the user is saying to you. Make notes in the ticket system that you're using. Make notes on a piece of paper, whatever you got to do to make sure that you understand the problem. A lot of times, failure in support relates to not understanding what the actual problem is. And it isn't just based on the customer or user describing it to you. You have to go back and check and make sure that that exactly is, and make a determination that that is exactly what the problem is. Because a bad assessment of the problem will never find you a solution. You always want to demonstrate to the customer that you are there to help them. You always want to demonstrate to the customer that you're prepared to help them. And you want to make sure that you understand what the end goals are and what you have to do to solve the customer's problem. You know, we talk a lot about professionalism and the traits of a good, competent, helpful support technician. But the idea behind good customer service includes planning ahead, making sure you're prepared, making sure that you're prepared to document things properly, making sure that you're prepared with the proper tools and research skills and abilities to solve the problem. And that's pretty much the large idea or the overview of how to properly support customers. And I will take some time to talk a little bit about something I talked about in the intro video, but it bears repeating. The skills that you're learning in this course, the skills to provide technical support, the skills to provide troubleshooting, the ability to configure and install new equipment, and for that matter, the ability to properly help people become familiar with it if that turns out to be part of your job. A lot of times support people are involved in installing equipment, going out to sites, making sure it's up and running. And they're tasked with the responsibility of showing users how to use it. Especially things like point of sale systems and equipment that requires some special knowledge to operate it properly. We usually call those vertical market applications. Vertical meaning the applications are designed for one specific purpose and built specifically for that company or that particular business. But the point that's important to consider when you're going through this class is that the skills as an IT technician, the skills as a support technician are skills that get people their first job in IT. And why do I say that? Well, I've had experience as both an IT professional in the insurance and the legal industry, and also as a manager all the way up to what's equal to a chief information officer, director of information systems. And in my experience, I've concluded that the best way to do hiring is to do it in a way that you do a lot of the training for the new employee. Yes, they have to have a minimum basket of skills when they walk in the door. Certifications are good. A certification may make one candidate a better candidate than another candidate who doesn't have a certification. Demonstration of knowledge is always good. Demonstration of skills is always good. Ability to think on your feet, ability to come up with solutions, ability to have a sixth sense for troubleshooting, those are all really good skills. And the point I'm making here is, in the company that I was the chief information officer for, director for, one of the things that we did was anybody we hired in the IT staff, no matter what their job responsibility was to be long term, we would start them out 90 days on the help desk. There was a really specific reason for that. I trusted the manager that ran help desk operations. They were a good judge of character. They were a good they were great at assessing people and their skills. But one of the other things that's important is your ability to work with your fellow users, your fellow employees. It's important for you to be able to get along, and it's important for you to be able to treat everybody with respect, no matter what level they're at. And my help desk manager was very good at identifying people with those types of characteristics. The other reason for starting them on the help desk was not just to test their skills, but it was also because if you worked on the help desk, you worked with people all over the company. And there were a lot of divisions of the company that did a lot of different things. So the best way to become familiar with what the company did and how to make money was to be on the help desk and talk with a lot of the employees, a lot of the divisions across the country, and to make sure that you became familiar with everything the company did. That was a critical skill to have. Not only did you need the help desk skills and the technology skills, but you also needed the skills of understanding the business and how the company made money. That was important. And giving somebody a 90-day stint on the help desk got them familiar with those things fairly quickly under a fairly stressful environment. So I want you to be sure you understand that, even though you may want to be a programmer or you may be ending up in a degree program at a 4-year school for database administration or data analytics or any of these great programs that are available, cybersecurity. Not the time to list them all, but you get my point. If you have the skills from this class and you do well, it might get your foot in the door. And as I said before, take this class seriously. You never know where your first job is going to come from. The other thing is if you're knowledgeable in these skills, it makes you more helpful. It makes you have an ability to do more things. And what I mean by that is today's organizational structures, people don't necessarily sit in silos anymore. Years ago, you'd have 3 or 4 people working in cubicles doing nothing but programming. You'd have 3 or 4 people doing help desk. You'd have another 4 or 5 people doing systems analyst work. You'd have all of these individual silos where people didn't necessarily interact with each other very much. A lot of companies have changed that organizational structure and have a more flat structure now. The flat structure means that you don't necessarily have these silos. You don't necessarily have people that only do one job anymore. You have people that do a lot of things. You have people that might have to have technology skills that aren't even in the IT department. And this type of base knowledge that you're learning in this class, even if you don't end up being an IT professional, even if you end up in some other business function or some other area, these skills are going to be helpful to you. Okay, enough about that. What I do want to do is continue on and talk a little bit about tools. A lot of help desk organizations, a lot of support organizations document their efforts by what is called call tracking software or help desk software. Now, a lot of this stuff has evolved over the years to being nothing more than a tracking system and a simple database to make sure somebody was assigned to a call and it was tracked, and eventually somebody took care of it and closed the ticket. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that these days. The software systems that are used in organizations can have AI components. They can have knowledge bases. A knowledge base is simply a database of all kinds of information from reliable resources about hardware, about software, so that when help desk people are doing calls, they can access that knowledge base to find potential solutions. That knowledge base also expands by virtue of the fact that solved help desk tickets become part of that knowledge base. So if the problem ever comes up again, especially in vertical market software that's just for that company, customized, especially if it's that kind of software and those kind of problems, the only information about that stuff and the history about that stuff is going to be internal. It isn't going to be from Microsoft. It isn't going to be from other companies that make software that's used by hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So help desk software is important, and it's gotten pretty fancy these days. From the time a customer submits a ticket, whether they do it online or make a phone call to the help desk or send an email, and the ticket's entered into the system, right up until the time the problem is solved and you're done with that customer and you close that ticket, that system tracks it. And that's critical information. Managers of help desk organizations can go back in and see how long it took to do a call. They can see what steps were taken to solve the particular problem that the customer or the user had. And they can do post-mortem analysis to determine whether or not it could have been done better or could have been done differently. A lot of times, we go down what we call rabbit holes. And a rabbit hole is chasing after a problem that isn't there, or identifying a problem incorrectly and trying to fix a problem that's not the problem. So post-mortem analysis is good because it also allows help desk people and technicians and IT support people to go back and look and see what could have been done better. The other thing that's important about help desk software is whether or not efficiencies are met. And efficiencies mean things like, is the help desk organization optimal as far as the number of calls they're getting and the number of support people and how many things are being solved as quickly as possible. Obviously, you can immediately determine if you don't have enough people working if help desk tickets have a aging life of more than a couple days. Now, some problems take longer to be solved because there's outside factors like equipment has to be sent away for repair or something has to be replaced and it takes a while to get one in to replace that particular part. We get that. But if generally speaking, things are taking long to fix, there might be something that could be done better to make things more efficient. And if you have lots of open help desk tickets with no action on them, you have to wonder if you've got enough staff levels to make sure that things are efficient and people are getting their problems solved. There's a lot of points made in the documentation and about the PowerPoints and the lab system that talks about ways to be efficient and ways to solve problems and ways to troubleshoot. And it's all great information. One of the things that I want to point out that in my experience in this business over years is that you can't always trust what you're told. There's a number of reasons for that, but the two big reasons are the customer, the user, doesn't necessarily have the skills to be able to properly describe what the problem is, or they're just interpreting the problem themselves, making a conclusion in their own mind about what needs to be fixed, when in fact they don't have enough information and enough experience to make that decision. And you have to be careful about that, because I always say, tongue-in-cheek, you gotta assume that the user is lying. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean they're on purpose lying. What I mean is they're not necessarily giving you the proper and accurate information for you to be able to assess the situation and come up with the proper solution. One of the tips that I always tell my support people when I was in that area specifically was you need to kind of trick the information out of the user sometimes. And one of the ways to do that, for example, is if you want users to do steps to see if a problem can be solved and you're not remoting into that particular PC and you're having the user respond to you and type information into the computer, you always want to do it in a way that the user can't assess things too carefully. You want to do it step by step, and you want to make sure they report back to you exactly what they've done. For example, you can have users move files around or look in folders in Windows. Another way to do it is you should be familiar with PowerShell and the prompt to be able to execute commands to do things like that. Now, most users aren't necessarily PowerShell users or command line users, so they don't necessarily know what you're asking them to do. So they're going to have to follow your instructions exactly for you to get what you want out of them. So that's a tip regarding the fact that sometimes you have to make them a little bit more reliant on you in order to make sure that what's going on the other end of that phone is what you want to be happening. The other thing I suggest is when you're asking questions about a problem, sometimes it's good to go back and re-ask those questions a different way to make sure you get the same answer. And you don't necessarily have to do this every single support call. It does kind of waste time. But if you feel like you're not getting accurate information, you're going to develop a sense for that. And when that happens to you, you can always rephrase or repropose a question in a different way to see if the answer is still the same. When you ask a question about when's the last time the problem happened, sometimes you'll get a vague answer. Well, short of you going and looking at, user logs or other things, you can always come back to that question later on and see if you get the same answer. Of course, doing telephone support tends to be a lot more difficult than being in person with someone and being over their shoulder. But one of the things that's important that you need to consider is, especially if you're a support technician in the same building as your users, is confidentiality. And that's kind of the next subject that I'd like to talk about. One of the things that's important to remember is in any company there's confidentiality concerns. If you're working in a hospital, there's the HIPAA regulations regarding patient information. If you're working at a community college, there's the FERPA requirements, the FERPA regulations regarding student policy and student information being private. If you work for a financial company like a brokerage house or a bank, there's federal regulations regarding financial information privacy. So you have to kind of be careful when you're helping somebody on a support call to not be viewing information that's privileged. It's very important to pay attention to that. So if you have to go help somebody at their desk, you want to make sure that you tell them not to have any client information, or if you can possibly avoid it, or any confidential information out while you're there working on that particular computer or with that particular user. I also need to point out that even if you are convinced that you know exactly what's wrong, and you go in and take action to fix it, and you determine that it's fixed, you always want to get the user's agreement that the problem is resolved. It's really important to make sure that you're all in agreement that the problem's fixed. The other thing you want to do, get into the habit of restart. If it's a Windows-based machine or even a Linux machine, after you fix the problem and you see that it's fixed and whatever it was that wasn't working is working, you need to ask the user to restart the system. Once they restart the system, you have them go through the same exact steps that they went through before when they had the problem, to make sure that after you restart their system, that problem doesn't come back. I'll bet you that 10 to 15% of support calls, when they're not done, when you don't have the customer restart, 10 to 15% of those calls come back to haunt you. I just want to give you that piece of advice. That should be part of the conclusion of any support call. That you both agree it's fixed, that you restart the machine, the customer relogs in, does the same exact thing again, make sure that it doesn't happen again. You also have to be careful how you conduct yourself in an environment where there's coworkers around. You always want to be professional, pleasant, and polite. You always want to give a good image of yourself. And if you're dealing with customers of the company, not necessarily employees of the the employees of the company, you want to be very careful about your image and about the company's image. If you're representing the customer, and let me give you an example of this. We used to, when I worked for a title insurance company, we used to put systems in agents' offices, insurance agents' offices. So those insurance agents were not employees of the company that I worked for. They were their own companies. And when we were out on their sites, we had to be careful because we were in agents' offices, and agents were our customers. They remitted money to the insurance company for premiums. So when you went out and you did something wrong with an agent, you could lose their business. So there's really two levels of customer service. There's internal customers and there's external customers. You have to be careful about that. You have to know the difference too. There's a lot of help desk stories that you can search online. Funny ones, tragic ones. But a lot of them are great lessons to learn about making assumptions in this business. You have to be careful about assuming things. One of the things that you want to be careful about is, and this is a great example, and this is a true example of somebody calling a help desk and saying, hey, I can't get on the internet. I don't know really what's going on. It's been like this since this morning. And, the user said, I was fine, and then all of a sudden it wasn't fine. The help desk person started asking the normal diagnostic questions, probably from a script, because a lot of ticket systems have scripts for particular problems to ask a series of questions. But what happened was they worked on the problem for a considerable amount of time. After an hour of not being able to resolve it and determining that, in fact, the network was not working, The internet was not working. The help desk person finally said, hey, and this is always a good question to ask up front, has there been anything happening in your neighborhood or on your street? What's been going on lately? Have you noticed anything unusual? And the customer said, oh, well, there was a lot of phone company trucks out there, and there was a big hole, and I think they might have gone and cut the phone lines or cut something. I'm not sure. And that was after about an hour of going back and forth diagnosing the problem. You could see what really the problem was right away. The line was cut. But that's a good story to give you an example of making assumptions you shouldn't make. Okay. So a lot of times you run into a situation where you have extenuating circumstances where the solution to the problem may not be within your control. And it's important for you to be able to recognize those situations and make sure that if it's something that needs to be reported to higher authorities, that you properly document it and you properly go through channels with it. There could be a security issue. There could be an issue with an employee that has to remain confidential because it may turn out to be an HR issue. You have to make sure that you, as being on the front line of interacting with users and employees, fellow employees of your company, that you understand what the proper procedures are for reporting issues, incidents, and any concerns relating to company policy. Now, I'm being vague about that because there's a lot of things that could go wrong in a company. But you need to be, as part of your indoctrination into the company and part of your help desk tasks and responsibilities, become familiar with company policies in just about every area. At least know where to look and know who to ask if you run into a situation that you're unsure of, especially relating to confidentiality. You have to make sure that you do the right thing. And you have to be sure that you don't bring yourself inadvertently into a situation that you shouldn't be in. One thing's for sure, you need to report things that you're concerned about through the proper channels. Other than that, that's really all about I want to cover tonight. I wanted to make sure that you had this information, and hopefully I'll be able to provide a few more of these videos throughout the semester on these particular subjects that relate to my experience as an IT professional, and try to tie some of this into your materials in either your books or your lab system, the CertMaster lab system. And I really want to stress to you that whenever you're confused or have a question, consult with the documentation for CertMaster, consult with with support services for CompTIA that are available online through the system. Google is your friend to search for things when you have trouble. There's tons of YouTube videos on A+ certification, on all kinds of technology topics. That's a two-edged sword, though. Sometimes the information's good, sometimes it's very inaccurate. You have to start being a judge of what's helpful to you and what isn't. But I will tell you this. Thank you for the internet, because you have the ability to learn in many different modes because of all the resources that are available just by doing a web search. When I was in school, we had the library, we had books, tapes, and fortunately a little bit of videos and things like that. But you've got a lot more resources available to you. And now with AI, you even have more resources available to you, where if you don't understand a concept or a problem, there's going to be a way where you're going to be able to go online and find an answer. Of course, as the instructor for this class, I'm available to help you with that. And you need to reach out to me whenever you have to. But there's also available at your fingertips lots of useful information in different formats for you to understand better a particular problem that you're not getting in one of the lab exercises or one of the assignments. Have a great night. Stay positive. You can do this. And we'll talk to you soon.